Good morning. Welcome to Seed Talk 2020. This session is upcoming changes to seed treatment regulations. Our presenter is Russell Hurst. He's Vice President of Sustainability and Stewardship with CropLife Canada. Thanks, Russell. Are you still muted?
Thanks, Lori. Can you hear me okay in terms of the audio quality?
Yes, it's good. Thanks.
Okay, super. And I have the visuals up. Are you seeing those okay?
Yes.
Okay, super. So I'll jump in. If there's any questions, I'm more than happy to address those. I should be probably about 20 to 25 minutes, Lori, and then hopefully there's some time for questions thereafter quickly. All right. So very briefly, for those of you on the call today that aren't familiar with CropLife Canada, it's the National Industry Trade Association that represents the pesticide and plant biotech manufacturers and distributors in the Canadian marketplace. Companies that we work on behalf of as CropLife Canada range from large multinationals all the way down to very niche regional organizations. But I always like to make a note just to provide a bit of context as to where the discussion is coming from a CropLife Canada perspective. In addition to that, really as a national trade association, we focus on 5 key strategic goals that our various staff focus on, ranging from the broader industry image and reputation around modern agriculture, at the regulatory level, advocating for innovation, new technologies, Canadian competitiveness at a global level, and ultimately to showcase the industry's commitment to sustainable agriculture. A lot of what I'll be speaking to today being our third strategic priority being leaders in life cycle stewardship and ensuring that the technology upon being commercialized in the Canadian marketplace has a very safe record as well as longevity in the marketplace. Number 5, we always look to broaden and enhance coalitions and alliances both at the national and the provincial level with various associations, the seed growers being one of the key major ones that we collaborate with on a number of issues across the broad spectrum. And then the last piece, and I think this is probably valuable for any association, is we always look to maximize the impact and the value of the association. So just a bit of context in terms of where CropLife Canada is coming at. In terms of the discussion today, a few things that I really wanted to get across was to provide a background in terms of why the accredited seed treatment standards were initially developed and the journey that we've gone on through phase 1 of the program implementation. So it's kind of the first half, if you will, and then the latter half being some discussion around the expanded scope of the seed treatment standards to 2021 and beyond. And then wanted to wrap up with a few key items that I think would be relevant for those seed growers on the call today. And ultimately, I'll have some contact information if any further information needs to be shared thereafter that maybe doesn't always, sometimes there's unique circumstances and so on and so forth that maybe is easier to share offline, and more than happy to make sure that option's available. So just in terms of a bit of background, and I could spend probably an hour going through all the various drivers that led us on this journey that we've been on for about 10 years, but I'll try to summarize it in 2 slides ultimately. So when we first started down this path, prior to 2009, which is when we first started at a very conceptual stage, examining the potential to develop some seed treatment operation standards at the CropLife board level. And really what we would articulate is pre-2009 being a lot of the environmental health and safety components of seed treatment application at that point were starting to become more sophisticated. We were seeing a lot more fungicide insecticide combinations entering the marketplace, and we're getting a lot of questions from the registrants, being Health Canada, or the Pest Management Regulatory Agency, around how these products were being applied. And I think a very easy way to grasp this would be, a lot of the evaluators at Health Canada were very competent at understanding the various use profiles of, say, a herbicide coming out of a field sprayer through a nozzle over the top, applying a product to either soil or a growing crop. When you get into how seed treatments are applied, it's just a very different process. And understanding the various environmental health and safety risks when going through that evaluation process was quite different. So we were getting a lot of inconsistency at the time in terms of how products were being evaluated. In addition to that, or an overlay of that, were at that point, that was really the first phase of the growth in the seed treatment marketplace in Canada. And over the past 10 years, it really has been the main growth segment within the larger crop protection industry in Canada. In addition to that, we did start to see some other initiatives taking place at an international level, being in the European marketplace, Australia, and the United States, in similar veins of developing industry standards in and around commercial seed treatment. So all that kind of led us to a discussion in 2009 at the CropLife Board, and the direction was provided was to examine developing a set of commercial seed treatment standards, which then led us to, over the next number of years, to work or assemble, if you will, a multi-stakeholder committee that was consisted of the entire value chain. So that included the registrants and the developers, ag retailers in the distribution space, the seed industry, being the seed companies and the seed grower segment of the marketplace, and then lastly the government, and at both a provincial and federal level as the overseers from a regulatory standpoint. And really, this group was charged with collectively and collaboratively developing a set of industry stewardship practices to improve how seed treatment products are both stored and applied. So that was a fairly long journey to get through that whole process. When we finally released the set of standards in 2014, we were on version 11. And over the course of 2010 through 2014, we typically would have meetings periodically, primarily in the winter, and chart a course for developing key components within those standards. And really what we were looking for is to address environmental health and safety concerns that were flagged by stakeholders around key areas or environmental health and safety risks that had been identified by evaluators, as well as encompass best management practices that the industry had identified and that we felt collectively we wanted to ensure that we're adhered to within the industry. So all that 4-year journey that we took culminated in 2014 when we released the initial set of seed treatment standards. They consisted of 80 specific audit protocols, of which 68 were based on existing regulations in one form or another, and the remaining ones were best management practices that collectively the industry agreed that were of value to include in the standards. So post that 2014 window, we went through a 2-year process where we encouraged facilities that were treating seed commercially. So this is going to range from a number of cohorts. Roughly speaking, it's going to include seed companies, it's going to include ag retail locations that treat seed commercially, it includes seed growers that treat seed commercially as part of their seed offering to the marketplace, and then lastly, it included seed cleaning co-ops, which are quite prevalent in Alberta, maybe to a lesser extent Saskatchewan. And so we went out to all those groups and encouraged those facilities to go through a pre-audit. At that point in time, we weren't there weren't any no ship policies per se as part of the program, but what we wanted to do is provide an opportunity for facilities to go through a pre-audit. There was no penalty for not passing the audit. It was really the entire goal was to provide seed treatment operations with as much business intelligence as they could as to where the seed treatment standards were, how they were stated, and what that current business, how they operated, if you will. So I'm not going to read through all the key statistics, but we ended up doing over the course of a 2-year period about slightly less than 500 pre-audits across the country. I think one thing to note is the various market segmentations. And again, this might not be 100% perfect because there are certain market segments that may trend into each of them. But I think one of the key things we wanted to show is what the various industry market segmentation breakdown was of those operations going through the pre-audit process, being whether they were, we call AWSA certified. That would be an ag retail location. They primarily identified as either a seed grower or a seed cleaning co-op, or ultimately a seed company. So after we went through that pre-audit window, in 2016, we reissued the standards. There was a couple things that came out of that pre-audit window. One was we updated some language or terminology, if you will, that, if you can appreciate, maybe is how an operation would articulate it in, say, Eastern Canada versus Western Canada were somewhat different. So we wanted to make sure that we had a language included in the standards that was as descriptive as possible. We provided additional clarifications on what I would call unique circumstances that exist. And I think ultimately what it resulted was a cleaner and clearer document in terms of the seed treatment standards. One thing I would note is we didn't actually change any of the specific protocols, but we added a significant amount of context to some of the protocols as to what was in scope, what was out of scope, what we meant by certain protocols, and some specific clarifications as examples of what would be deemed satisfactory based on a whole host of circumstances. So after that 2016 window, in 2017, that was really the point in time where direction came at the registrant level and throughout the entire value chain that we would invoke a no ship policy at some point, being in 2018. So in 2017, commercial facilities were at that point encouraged to go through a full audit. And in addition to that, we wanted to make sure that those facilities didn't feel that they were off on their own islands. So we provided a significant amount of technical feedback, interpretations, tried to spend as much time with facilities as they needed to provide additional audit clarity, so on and so forth. Coinciding with that, we released our initial designated seed treatment product listing. And ultimately what that was there was 41 seed treatment registrations on commodities that had label statements for commercial seed treatment. We kept phase 1 exclusive to commercial seed treatment in the corn, canola, and soybean space. So anything that wasn't corn, canola, and soybean was not included as part of phase 1. So from a Saskatchewan standpoint, seed treatment operations that would be involved in soybean seed treatment would have been required to go through this process prior to 2018. If you were only treating, say, cereals or pulse crops, you would not have been required to go through that, but stay tuned because that's changing for 2021. So basically we went through that in after the standards were released in 16, January 1, 2018, the no ship policy was implemented. Ultimately how that works at a very top level is when an ag retailer or a distribution facility is shipping a designated seed treatment product, the site or the commercial seed treatment operation would need to provide them verification that they have completed or successfully completed an accredited seed treatment audit, and they're provided with a 6-digit confirmation number that would then go on bills of lading and shipping documentation. And ultimately it's the responsibility of the ag retailer or distribution company to ensure that they're only shipping product to facilities that have successfully passed an audit. So just some raw statistics, and again, I'm not going to go through all of these, but as of about a month and a half ago, this is the last time we did a hard run of the data, there's 425 facilities across the country that are currently certified with the program. And again, the breakdown between what we would call AWSA certified, which are really ag retailers, seed growers, seed cleaning co-ops, and seed companies. One thing I would note is a little bit of a difference in terms of the market segmentation percentages from phase one versus where we were in 2014, 2015 with the pre-audit window. And that's primarily because we did have a higher number of seed growers go through that pre-audit window that, based on the commodity selection, i.e. the lack of cereals and or pulse crops as part of that initial phase one designated seed treatment product listing, made a business decision not to go through that initial audit process, which is fine. That's a business decision that they made. So that's ultimately why we see that seed grower number drop down to that 35% from, say, a high 40%. That noted, when we get into phase two of the standards, we foresee that number trickling up. So ultimately, that AWSA certified sites, the number of retailers on a percentage basis will drop over the course of time. Just a very quick visual representation of all of the certified seed treatment locations on a national basis. And if anybody would like more details on a regional basis, just let me know and we can certainly provide this type of information. We try to post as much of this publicly as possible so that everybody can have a very good understanding of the distribution within the sector. One thing I would note is a lot, and from a Western Canadian perspective, specifically in that southern Manitoba and eastern Saskatchewan marketplace, soybean production being very predominant in that area. What we'll see over the course of time is the density of those pins in Saskatchewan and Alberta will get more dense as seed treatment operations that are exclusively focusing on cereals and pulse crops come online over the course of the next couple of years. A couple of observations that I wanted to share with everybody, just in terms of some things that we learned from the phase one of the program implementation. And I think these will be very relevant as we go through the phase two journey. So the first being, what we tried to do is ensure that there's as many technical interpretations provided to sites as we possibly can. One thing we was very clear for us is within that seed treatment sector, there's a lot of diversity even within operation to operation. So we wanted to ensure that from a facility standpoint, there was lots of resources out there for owner operators, site staff to ask questions as to how the standards apply to them. In addition to that, we provided a lot of information around interpretations of fire code, building codes, shipping processes, environmental health and safety requirements. And really the mindset was we wanted to put as much of that information out there for facilities that are going through this process so that they don't feel they're off on their own. We develop a lot of supporting materials, a lot of templates, and really the mindset is that we'll do 90% of the work. If a facility just fills out the template, they'll get the latter 10%. One thing I would note is all this information we post on the AWSA website. So certainly go if you would like to learn more about all these supporting documents, go to AWSA. There's a seed treatment tab. Click on that, and you'll see all the resources posted there electronically. A couple other things that we wanted to note as we went through this process. Over the course of time, we did see the prevalence of mobile seed treaters entering the marketplace. So that's something that we did try to ensure that we incorporated into how the standards are interpreted. Specifically, there are a few differences between a truly mobile treater and say a brick and mortar or a fixed treater circumstance. So within that, we provided a number of technical interpretations as to what was within scope and what was out of scope for mobile seed treatment units. In addition to that, as this is a no-ship policy and we do have a level of compliance and enforcement to adhere to, What I can say is over the past couple of years, we have had a handful of circumstances where facilities were not abiding by the no ship policy. Very, very small number. That noted, how we address those is typically behind the scenes is we'll address any circumstances if a seed treatment operator is advertising for sale, or we have documentation that they're treating a designated seed treatment product and are not on a designated commodity and are not a certified location. We'll work with that site to get them on the right side of the fence, either get them certified or have a very direct conversation with them as to the obligations within the industry. A couple other things that I would note is over the course of this whole process, we have not noticed any further restrictions on the seed treatments products or technologies entering the marketplace. And I think that's quite important from my standpoint. Ultimately, what it allows is those tools to remain in the toolbox of seed growers and farm operators across the country in the foreseeable future. Moving forward, our future direction, and I think this is where I wanted to spend a couple more minutes before I wrap things up, would be in May of 2018, there was further direction from the CropLife Board to expand the scope of the seed treatment standards to encompass all commercial seed treatment facilities. So phase one being designated products on corn, canola, and soybeans. This being phase two, which would encompass all commercial seed treatment facilities. So in very real terms, that would be seed treatment facilities that are treating commercially small grains and pulse crops. And that program would be implemented for January 1, 2021 with the no ship policy. So approximately 9-ish months from now. So in terms of the timing, again, this whole COVID-19 thing is throwing a little bit of a wrench into the plans here, but I suspect what we'll land on is if we are going to make any change to that January 1, 2021 timeline, we'll probably make it by early summer. But in terms of the timing, right now it's effective as of the end of 2020. Any products, any commercial seed treatment products being shipped out as of January 1 would require a site to be accredited to the standards. In terms of the scope of this phase two, we're anticipating it'll capture about possibly 200 to 300 sites nationally. One of the challenges we had in this process is we really didn't know all of there wasn't a hard number or a hard statistic or a hard database that we could tap into to fully understand where all the commercial seed treatments were taking place across the country. We had a pretty good idea, and we can work with various companies and CSI and CSGA and CSTA and trying to articulate that number. But what we ultimately had to do is take a best guess. So that's what we think the market size is. And then over the course of the past 18 months, we've been working with a number of the key stakeholder groups that I won't go through all of them, but the seed growers be one of the very major ones to ensure that all of their members that may be impacted by this expanded program scope are up to speed on the potential impacts to their business so that they can plan appropriately. In terms of some of the background that we typically get in terms of discussions around why we chose to do this from an industry standpoint, is the first one being really to ensure that all commercial seed treatment products are being applied in accordance with the industry standards or industry scope. Where we landed on phase one would be, it was very much a phased in approach where we tried to do that in a manner that, how do you eat an elephant? Well, one bite at a time. So in discussing this with the value chain, we felt that was a phase one, phase two approach was probably the best way to alleviate market chaos and allow a very methodical process of how these standards are ultimately implemented. The other thing that we really wanted to do is reduce the administrative burden on the program through a phased-in approach. And right now, the retailers are having to designate go through the designated seed treatment product listing and do waiver forms and what have you. So moving to the phase 2, where it's a blanket statement around all commercial seed treatments, makes it significantly less administrative heavy and very easily understood at the commercial seed treatment level. Is if you're treating seed commercially, you'd be required to go through this whole process. And in addition to that, when we're working with all the value chain partners and going through this as part of the development and implementation process, we even had requests from various seed grower organizations to say, like, let's clean this up, let's make it really straightforward, and we're generally supportive of expanding the scope of the program so that it's quite clear. And in some cases, an operation, if they're treating multiple commodities, some in, some out, it became it just cleaned it up from their standpoint. So moving forward, a couple things before I wrap up. This process is challenging. We're asking for change, and with change comes different levels of embracing change on the bell curve of life, if you will, from early adopters to laggards. I think what we try to do is we try to ensure that we're very consistent and open with providing a level of support and feedback. Certain sites and certain owner operators require different levels, so we try to be quite flexible in terms of how we work with each of those sites through our auditors to help them achieve compliance with the standards. The other thing I think we look at is from all the CropLife Canada member companies, they're very committed to ensuring that these standards are implemented. It's very much a vision for a vibrant commercial seed treatment industry in the future, is to have a common approach to environmental health and safety. And by having a by industry for industry program, it really alleviates us in some cases from government regulation, both at a federal and a provincial level, and ultimately, if there are issues that we can address, we can do those collectively with the entire seed treatment industry versus having it dictated to you in some instances. So a couple things before I wrap up here. I would encourage anybody that would like to know more about this program and how it impacts their business. The designated seed treatment product listing is posted on the AWSA website. We update that as new seed treatment products are registered or enter the marketplace. So at a minimum, we do this typically once a year. The last time we updated this was in January of 2020, and it's on there as a downloadable PDF. The other thing that we issue periodically are industry memos. So as a member of the Saskatchewan Seed Growers Association, Maury gets these, and the ask is ultimately that they be distributed to the membership. So a typical example is when we issue memos around program scope and key dates and pertinent program information. We push those out through the various channels. In addition to that, those are posted publicly on the AWSA website. And just a couple things before I wrap up. We really try to ensure that we have an open pathway of communication here. And one thing we really encourage is the pre-audit incentive policy. And any facility that's going through this process, we really want to ensure that they have as much information at their hands to make informed business decisions as possible. And one of the things that we did in the rollout to phase 1 is encourage sites to go through a pre-audit with an AWSA auditor. There's 32 of them across the country. All their names and contact information, emails, cell phone numbers, etc., are on the AWSA website. So just find one. You can click Saskatchewan, and it'll give you a listing of all the auditors in Saskatchewan. And what we basically do is we'll provide a subsidy for them to visit the operation and provide a pre-audit. There's no penalty for doing it. Ultimately, the outcome or the output of that pre-audit process is the auditor will spend about a half day going through your operation and provide you with a corrective action list as to where you're compliant with each protocol on a protocol by protocol basis, and any areas where you're not compliant. And in addition to that, they'll provide some direction as to what you need to do as an operator to be in compliance. And they'll do that for all of the various protocols. And really the value that we found in doing that was that as an operator, you then have a very clear understanding of where the goalposts are. and it ultimately makes for a smoother audit process. And really what we tried to do in that case is, if you can provide a half day to arrange for a mutually agreed upon time with the auditor to come visit your operation, that'll provide a great deal of information for you to make business related decisions. Now, one thing I would note with the whole COVID-19 issue is we initially had a deadline of March 31st for those pre-audits to be completed. As one could expect, that date has been extended indefinitely. Once the travel restrictions subside, we'll probably come out with an industry memo. As of right now, we're probably thinking whenever those subside, we'll add an additional 90 days to complete those pre-audits in preparation for 2021. That noted, if this drags out into the end of the summer, we'll probably have to reevaluate our timelines at that point as well. But stay tuned. We'll issue a lot of those through our various stakeholder channels, specifically the Saskatchewan seed growers, where that information will be shared. So as I wrap up, one of the things that we do like to do within the pre-audits is we provide exemptions for grandfathering policies. So I'm not going to get into all the specific details because this gets into the weeds pretty much. But in terms of a couple of the key ones being Protocol A1, grandfathering status for facilities that are located within 30 meters of an environmentally sensitive area. A2, located at distances in established floodplains. So that's a big issue in some regions, specifically in Manitoba and lower mainland BC as an examples. B2, exterior walls are constructed with non-combustible material. So ultimately wood frame structures are built of very flammable material. So what we do with these grandfathering clauses are we would not have presumed a facility at some point in the past would have built a facility to be constructed of non-combustible material if they were not required to. Keep in mind, any new build 2021 onward would be required to be built of non-combustible material, i.e. how you achieve that is metal or double sheeted drywall to achieve a fire rating. So a straight wood frame structure moving into 2021 would not be deemed acceptable. B2 is just an inner outer. I won't go into the details. B3 being storage has curbing of 10 centimeters around the seed treatment area. Again, one of the key issues that we wanted to address from an environmental health and safety standpoint was the ability of a facility to, in the event of a spill, to safely contain that spill. And B10 being floor and floor support structures, again, and some of the older structures that we've come across that have elevated treatment units, it would not be deemed practical to redo the stanchions and the supports within a facility. So we will provide grandfathering status for those particular operations moving forward. That noted, new builds in 2021, those floor and floor support structures ultimately will be required to be constructed of non-combustible material. So just as I wrap up, a couple things to keep in mind. Ensure that you're up to speed with the seed treatment standards. If you're a seed grower and you're treating seed as part of your service offering as a commercial entity, these standards will be applicable to you whether they are today or into the future. Ensure that you work with your suppliers and customers and make them aware of this. There's a lot of resources out there at the industry level as well as at the association level to help with any technical or strategic resources. If there are any questions, generally what I find is we try to be very solution oriented. It's like a 90-10 factor. 90% of the time it's really simple, and 10% they're going to be unique and tough situations. And certainly reach out to us at CropLife. We will do what we can to help out and provide some guidance on those circumstances. The other thing I would note before I wrap up is there's a lot of training and education requirements within the standards. A lot of cases as seed growers, you're already doing this via your associations as well as the various business partners that you have. A lot of it is just taking credit for it and documenting it. And again, I can't underemphasize, there are a lot of resources on the AWSA website under the seed treatment tab. Check it out. There's a lot out there. What we tried to do is provide as much information for sites that are going through this process. One of the big ones that we have is, we call it a build a binder. And within that, there's a document that you can download. It has all of the documentation requirements within the seed treatment standards, all in templated form. As an operator, all you have to do is fill in the blanks. Again, very much the mindset of doing 90% of the work, and as an operator, you do 10% to fill it out. But that's a very good way of achieving a lot of that documentation in a very clear, concise manner that doesn't take oodles and oodles of time to do that. So I think with that, Lori, I'll wrap up. Here's my contact information. If anybody has any questions, please give me a phone call, shoot me an email. I'm more than happy to help out, answer any questions, address any issues, so on and forth. We want to make sure that as sites that are going through this process, you're well supported in it. So there we go, Lori.
Thanks so much, Russell. And so we're open for questions for Russell. If anybody's got any through the chat or they want to raise their hand on the phone. So I'll wait a couple minutes, and at this time, I'm going to thank again all of our sponsors who have supported us this year for all of the events that we've had and are going to have. So, any questions?
Lori, it's Barry here. I have a question.
Okay.
Yeah, Russell, thanks for the information. It's I've heard it before, but it's good to have an update. I'm one of the seed growers that are in those numbers that had the pre-audit, but is still outside of the system. And the thing that's holding me up from going ahead is the seed treatment storage. Other than that, I'm basically very close to being compliant the way I am, but the seed treatment storage is one area where I just wasn't. And it's an expensive thing to comply with. So, you know, I'm a farmer and a seed grower. So as a farmer, I can have unlimited inventory of seed treatment products now and going forward. But if I'm going to do any custom treating, which is an insignificant portion of my business, I have to have the seed treatment storage that is pretty onerous. So that's what's held me up, and it seems to be I understand the goals of the program, but if my neighbor who's a farmer can have unlimited amounts of seed treatment on his farm, and I'm just down the road and I'm trying to do a little bit of business, and I have to spend a significant amount of money to store it on my farm, it just seems to be something a little bit wrong there.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Barry. I think that's a very common question that we get across the country. So I maybe can answer it in two veins. The first being the commercial versus on-farm treatment, and the reality of that situation is when we look at it from a regulatory standpoint, there is a very clean line between commercial operations that treat seed for sale or gain, irregardless of the volume or the quantity. So if you're treating a 10-liter jug commercially, you're in, and how that's viewed in a in a regulatory realm at Health Canada is very different than on-farm treatment, regardless of the volume. So I think the challenge that we have is when we deal in a highly regulated environment versus how things are used in the marketplace versus say a seed grower, that, and I think you're bang on in how you articulated it. It may be a very small part of your larger farm business. And so that's probably not going to be a great answer from our standpoint, other than if you are treating seed commercially, here's what the world looks like moving forward. That noted, the second piece that I think I would want to make sure is very well understood at an industry level is in regards to the seed treatment storage, we try to provide a number of avenues that an operation can go down, and we are very sensitive that some of these changes may be capital intensive, for maybe a lack of a better way of saying it. But what we encourage our auditors to do with each of the sites is to look at various scenarios as to how they can achieve the storage. So in some cases, for larger facilities, it does include a unique structure that would be their seed treatment storage area. But for other circumstances, we've seen some facilities use the shipping containers for storage, and others in other situations for smaller volume treatment, they've designated an area within a larger structure and used baffled spill pallets and that type of thing to achieve it. And really what we try to not have is achieving a seed treatment storage does not have to be $100,000 business expense. It can be a few $1,000 business expense as we go through this. Now, again, and as I noted, every circumstance and every situation is a little bit different. But what we really try to do is work with sites to find a solution that meets their business realm, but also that at an industry level, we can say with a high degree of certainty that commercial seed treatment facilities follow these protocols. So again, it's maybe a hard answer on the commercial versus on farm, whereas the second component around how one actually achieves storage, I think is there's a couple avenues that we can go down. So certainly, I think the message I would want to convey is that we're very open to working with sites, and there isn't ultimately a one size fits all solution in this case. It really depends on the site and the size of their business, the scope of their business, where they see it today versus the future, and so on and so forth.
Okay, thanks, Russell. That helps somewhat. I guess what I'm looking for is some kind of middle ground.
Yep.
And you've kind of provided some of that. It should be, in my view, it should be practical based on the risk and based on the amount of product involved. So I'll maybe work with my auditor, and from what I hear you're saying, that you may be open to innovative proposals if they fit the aims and objectives of the program.
Yeah, I think very much, and both for yourself, Barry, and others on the call, certainly reach out to the auditors and myself or any of our team. I think it's very much, yeah, we have a protocol requirement that we need to satisfy, but as you articulated, Barry, depending on the site and the circumstance, there's probably a couple different ways we can approach it. What I would say is, if we were looking at this standard as to, say, a chemical warehouse in an ag retail location, that program is very rigid. It is very black and white. You have to do X, Y, and Z. The seed treatment standards are, and I hope this doesn't come across as bad in any way, they're more flexible in terms of some of these protocol requirements, taking into account there's a high degree of variability within the sector. So again, most of these are, as long as we can ensure that there is a level of site security around spill containment, as an example, we can usually work with the site and the auditor to come up with something that's practical and reasonable. Again, some of these are maybe get into some very unique site-by-site situations, but I would encourage anybody, contact your auditor that you're working with, or if you aren't currently working with one, contact one and do a pre-audit, because it'll provide you a very clear understanding of just as Barry, what you had noted, what you're in compliance with and what you aren't, so that you can have a very clear understanding of the path forward.
Okay, great. Thanks, Russ.
Thanks, Russell. Are there
My
any?
pleasure. Thanks for organizing this, Lori.
Oh, you're welcome. There's going to do another call for questions on the chat, or anybody that has another question, put up their hand. Seeing none, then thank you very much, Russell, for providing us with the information on what's coming up, and maybe got some action items on a few people's lists from this. Thank you, and thank you so much. Bye.